of the Southeast. Today we're going to be going over the air makeup unit overview and applications. So we're just going to start off showing you our corporate headquarters right here in Rockwall, Texas. This is going to be a 150,000 square foot facility. One of the big things we like to promote is that we do have an open door policy. So definitely once this time is over with and we can all get back to kind of a little bit of a normal life, please feel free to give us a call, come out and visit, kind of do what we're all about, the products that we manufacture in-house. So we have three main business segments. One of that is going to be the core and catalog equipment. This is going to be your IB booths, spray booths, automotive booths, powder booths, ovens. We got engineered products such as, this is going to be your systems. You got your washers, your cure ovens, your just overall just finishing systems. And then we have RP filtration products. This is going to be a big thing that we like to promote as well, is that we are the only manufacturer that manufactures spray booths and their own filter product line as well. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the overview of the presentation. This is just going to be a brief presentation of our air makeup units. We're not going to get into really anything too specific. More or less, we just kind of want to give you an overview of our CT unit, as well as some custom air makeup units such as recirculating, temperature and humidity control. Also some considerations as in, job site constraints, the configurations that we offer, just kind of things to keep in mind so that way you can be able to advise the customer best and then also be able to get a quote from us as well. So air makeup units, the reason that we need them, of course, it is a NFPA requirement. So it replaces the air exhausted out by the spray booth. Big thing that the reason it is a requirement is because with your spray booth being in there and pulling out your air, definitely in your building, if you have any doors that are in there, it'll create a negative balance inside your building. So that can cause issues with, doors being slammed shut, or just doors being hard to open, and that could cause problems for your personnel. And then another thing is too, during the in the winter when someone's using their heat, it's just going to start sucking out all the heat in the building, and then during the summertime you'll start losing the AC. So the customer will definitely start to feel some hidden costs that he may have not known without not having an air makeup unit or some type of air replacement. So our air makeup units, as you see the CT units, they're sized for the application, and what we mean by that, just if you have a booth that's in there, whatever the CFM of that booth is, that's typically how we size the air makeup unit. So if you have a 10,000 CFM booth that's pulling out 10,000 CFM, the air makeup unit will be replacing that same amount of air. Definitely multiple configurations. We can do a horizontal unit, vertical, multiple discharges as well. And then we got demand units, which is going to be more of your building dumps, where it just kind of acts as air replacement, not like the dedicated unit, which is going to be directly ducted to the booth, which you actually see in the picture to the right. And then we, of course, also will get into the recirculating and the temperature and humidity control. So right here, our CT series unit, most important thing it is going to be ETL listed, and it's got a galvanized finish on it. One of the important things I like to talk about as well that some people may not know about is the automatic booth pressure control. So what that means is it does come with a VFD on the intake fan of the air makeup unit itself, and a VFD unit for the exhaust fan that's located on the spray booth. And what it does there is that it allows you, with the PLC controller that comes with it as well, it allows the customer to easily be able to balance his booth, which is a big plus for them, and it makes it a lot easier to keep their booth, with positive pressure and be able to just work the spray booth a lot easier. So some of the benefits that we've definitely received from the CT unit is the lower noise, and the reason for that is that it has larger ductwork, which sometimes can be an issue just due to the size of the ductwork. with installation purposes and, with an indoor unit being on top of the booth or being indoors, that intake ductwork, of course, has to go out and be able to pull fresh air from somewhere. And sometimes you can run into issues with that, but definitely we definitely like to be on the positive side where it is a lower noise, and sometimes that's very important for customers. Definitely extensive. We'll cover this in the next slide. There's a lot of configurations for the air makeup unit as well to make it easier to maybe, be able to better, if we got issues with the ductwork being able to get outside the roof, or, just it may be expensive. We have options for going outdoors and being vertical or on top of the roof. Big thing is you can also do third-party listings as well. And then the big thing I like to say is that we offer the 5-year warranty for this unit as well. So if we have that program, as long as you're using our filters in our spray booth, we do offer the 5-year warranty, not only just for the air makeup unit, for the booth as well, and the LED lights that are inside it. So all the major components are covered under the 5-year warranty. So here's a overview of the options that you can get for the air makeup unit. As you can tell, there is quite a few different configurations, each one with their own benefit, just depending on where you're at, where you're located, where the building and spray booth location is going to be. You can certainly find an orientation that's going to best fit your needs. So definitely don't hesitate to maybe come up with something, or definitely suggest to us what may be best, or a possibility that you may need. So here's going to be the controls. As you can see here, you got it's got a digital magnehelic gauge on it. The panel here is it's going to be a standard panel. Simply, you search your booth up, you can stop your booth and air makeup unit, and then you can start the cure mode on this. And of course, this would not be on it if it's a heat only unit. And then you have your booth lights off and on. And then this is actually a customized feature to this one. And on this particular panel, they actually had light levels. So we had different lumen lights that they could operate at different foot candles. So on here too, you can tell that this is very similar almost to a thermostat at home, but this one, if you're having cure, you have multiple recipes that you can use. Even for the heat only, you're going to have your winter mode, your summer mode, and then it'll show you if the fan is on and the burner. And definitely it's very easy to use and very user friendly. All right, and here are some AMU models. As I mentioned before, we talked about heat only. So basically what heat only is, it offers a 90-degree temperature rise. And not only we say 90-degree temperature rise, but it can be adjusted to, if he doesn't need as much, if he doesn't need 90-degree rise, you can certainly adjust it down and not have so much heat coming into your booth. Then of course we got the cure mode, which when you put it on cure, it reduces the exhaust by half, and then it raises the temperature. So this way you can cure some paints, and also most importantly you can dry your part quicker, which is a big plus for a customer, because if he can dry his part in half the time, basically he can improve his production by half, just because now he's able to dry twice the amount of parts. A dedicated unit, which we talked about, as it said, dedicated. So the air makeup unit is ducted directly to the booth and is only supplying air to that booth. And one of the things too that we have is a prep mode. So with the prep mode, you can, what it is, it's a feature on more or less the controls, but you'll have gun hooks located inside your spray booth. And once the operator is done spraying, he'll then hang up his spray gun. And once he hangs it on this hook, it then communicates to the air makeup unit that he is no longer spraying. And once that happens, it then begins to lower the exhaust in the AMU CFM. This way it acts kind of as a prep mode, which means that it kind of helps you with operating cost. It lowers the amount of CFM going through there and kind of helps with energy cost savings. And then something that we'll get into a little bit more is a demand unit, which is, it's a building dump. It also can be set up for multiple speeds, and it can accommodate air replacement for multiple booths. Here's some considerations that we like to talk about. One that I personally like is a low profile air makeup unit. So sometimes when you're putting a AMU on top of a booth, you'll start running into, hey, this air makeup unit's not going to fit on top of the booth because we got structure above it. So there is an option to go low profile, which is where instead of it having a single fan that discharges, it'll then have two fans. And it does increase the size of the ductwork, which is something else to keep in mind, but it will be able to shorten that air makeup unit. Depending on the size of the CFM, sometimes you can get as low as 3 to 4 foot. Also installation and service. So whenever, to keep in mind, you are going to have to install the unit. So I do say I feel sometimes it's a benefit to be on top of the roof, but that requires other equipment that you're going to have to install with. So definitely just keep in mind with the unit, and we can always provide drawings and sizes of their makeup units so you can be well advised ahead of time of what you're going to need in order to install this equipment. So service, another thing we offer is going to be a service platform and ladder. So we can add this to the booth, which makes it a lot easier for a customer to be able to get on top of their booth and maintain that air makeup unit. Also the VFD. So the VFD that is on the control panel of the air makeup unit itself, you want that to be less than 100 foot away from the VFDs that are on the exhaust on the control panel for the spray booth, just because if you go more than 100 foot, it then requires special gauge wiring, which can get very expensive very quickly. So we definitely recommend to keep that air makeup unit less than 100 foot away. Single phase, so we can accommodate any power, but one of the things I would advise on with single phase power is that there's large motors in play at this time, and you can really begin to increase those amps. And a lot of times you'll run into issues where sometimes the customer won't even have the ability to be able to accommodate the power consumption that it'll require. So, just keep in mind, and sometimes it's a recommendation that maybe the customer just go ahead and put 3-phase power in. And especially because it's going to save them over in the long run as well. As I said, dimensions, we can share that. And then a big thing too we like to talk about is that it does have a regulated gas inlet supply, and it's at 2 psi. So I know there's sometimes people over in the East Coast have less than this, and we can accommodate it, but it definitely is something that we want to know ahead of time before the unit goes into production. A couple other things, it is manufactured in Wisconsin by Titan. So that means one, Titan it's an excellent company, and they offer a great product. And our Col-Met unit or CT unit is a engineering design by Col-Met exclusively. But some things to keep in mind, of course, especially if you're down south, that's just a little bit more in the freight estimate, because you're going to have a unit coming all the way from Wisconsin. Also, the dates can be different. Typically, our units run from about 8 to 10 weeks on production. And our booths, normally we can get them out quicker than that. So we can either work with you, and if you want both the air makeup and unit, both a booth and the air makeup unit at once, we can definitely accommodate that, or we can actually ship the booth to you sooner. So that way the customer can begin installing the booth, and then as the air makeup unit's finished, it'll get shipped to them. We talked about that it does have a galvanized finish. However, there is an option for a painted white. So I think that's very important. It's an additional cost, but I think it is important if the customer is going with a powder coated white booth, for cosmetic reasons, it just looks a lot better if they have a white air makeup unit. Also, the air makeup units we can accommodate from all the way down to 1200 CFM, all the way up to 120,000 CFM. So definitely a large range. However, of course, if you're getting to 120,000 CFM, we definitely begin to have the conversation that we probably need to go with multiple units instead of just one extremely large unit. So right here, this is going to be some information that we look for to provide a quote to you. The snippet that you see here, where you see the AMU type, orientation, and location, That actually comes right from our colmetsb.com website. You can go on there and you can request a quote. And once you say yes, that you do need an air makeup unit, you'll see these questions in gray to the right, they'll pop up. And that's really all that we need to know in order to provide a quote for you. But you know, we got heat only, heat and cure, what orientation do you need, the location, and of course the CFM required. Another thing that I do like to point out, of course, is the airflow balancing. Auto is standard, but we can do manual, which sometimes is a benefit for someone that is just using a building dump unit, maybe just for air replacement, and doesn't necessarily need it to, it doesn't really need the auto balancing feature. And then, of course, the multi-unit input, and that would just be if you have multiple booths inside a building and you're wanting to be able to provide an air makeup unit that can supply the different types of CFM depending on which booth is running. All right, so we're going to go ahead and dive into a little bit of the of recirculation. We have two types. We have recirc during cure mode, and then of course we also have the recirc during spray. So when you're doing during cure, basically what we add is a mix box to the air makeup unit. And what this mix box does, it actually has dampers on either side, and what it does, it controls the amount of air going into the air makeup unit. So as you see here, we have, so this booth, say it needs 10,000 CFM. It's going to discharge 100% of that air supply. It's going to go into your booth. It's going to go to your exhaust plenum, and then our exhaust fan will be set up for 20% of that air. So as you can see here, it's 10,000, 20% exhausting out 2,000 CFM, and then you're going to have recirc duct that actually runs from that mix box damper to your exhaust plenum, and what it's doing is it's recirculating 80%. So it's pulling 8,000 CFM back into your air makeup unit, and then your fresh air, going down to the other damper, that damper is allowing 2,000 CFM to come in, or 20%. So that way you get 100% of the air, and you're recirculating, which definitely saves on energy, as well as allowing you to be able to heat up the booth a little bit quicker, because you're not bringing in all that cold air from outside. You're only bringing in 20%. The recirc during spray, so it's a little bit different, and of course there's some stipulations that come with it, and I'll talk about that as well. But first, so you got your air handler. For the spray, you're actually going to be discharging, for this one it's 70-30, and you can do different ratios. Typically our standard is an 80-20 and a 60-40, and it just kind of depends on the size of the booth and kind of where you want your ranges to be. I definitely recommend 80-20 for smaller booths. We get into the larger ratios when it's a larger, with the like 60-40. I say it's better for larger booths, just to kind of keep the air around the same CFM. But so on this one particular, so you got 10,000 CFM that's required. 30% of that air is being discharged into the booth, and then it's getting pulled into your exhaust chamber. And then to keep in mind, we definitely recommend niche shaft filtration. Since you are going to have VOCs coming back into your booth, you want a higher filtration, so that way you get a lot of those VOCs out. And then, so as it goes into your exhaust plenum, it comes up, we are going to have a dedicated recirc fan. And this is also where an additional cost comes in. You have to have a LEL monitoring sensor inside there, as well as a control panel. And what this sensor does is it just makes sure that the air that's inside that ductwork is below 25% LEL per NFPA. And that recirc fan, of course, is actually going to be recirculating the 70% of air. So that way you got 70% being recirculated and 30% being supplied, which then gives you your 100% of CFM. And for this model in particular, you got 10,000 inside the booth. And then your exhaust fan will be set up for 30%, which is pulling out that 3,000 CFM. And then also the one thing to keep in mind that I almost forgot was that the operator inside, he is going to need personal protective equipment, some type of fresh air supply, since there are going to be VOCs in that booth. So we definitely want to protect him. All right, and we're going to talk a little bit about the temperature and humidity control. So this is definitely needed whenever someone needs if they need their booth to have a specific environment, on a temp range or humidity range, and they want their booth to stay at 75 degrees, all throughout summer and all throughout winter. So, but some things that we want to talk about on this is we definitely highly recommend recirculation, and this would be during spray, which we just went over. Which the big thing about that is these units are very expensive. So so if you're able to do an 80-20 on this, only having to bring in 20% of the air, and that greatly reduces the amount of cost of the initial equipment. So it's definitely good for that end. Of course, you see a little bit of a rise because you're now going to have an LEL sensor, and of course your operator's now going to have to have some different equipment on. But I definitely think it's a great thing, and it saves on operating cost, and so the next thing it's going to be insulated panels is another recommendation. So if you got a booth that's inside a room that, let's say it's not air conditioned, so you have a booth that's got 75-degree air inside of it, and then outside it there's 100-degree, we're in the summertime, and you want those insulated panels because it really prevents sweating. And then also the thing is that it allows for better control of the booth environment, and definitely you see some cost. Just like houses, there's a reason that there's insulation inside those walls. All right, and the location we like to talk about as well. You want these units to be, it's highly recommended that they're just outdoor. They're large units, and the condensers that are on them pull in a lot of air and they generate a lot of heat. So it's definitely something that you do not want inside a building. And then the closer that you keep those two together, it reduces cost, because if the chemical, it's glycol, that's going to be inside that condensing unit go into the air makeup unit. If those lines, if you have to change elevation or make turns, it's something that actually has to be re-engineered, and to be able to determine the proper pressure and glycol levels that is needed to accommodate the cooling or the humidity that's going to be required in that booth. And for quotes, so one of the most important things is just where's the unit going to be located at. That way we can get the ASHRAE climate data. We need to know, what the change is going to need to be when.
Oh, sorry, I apologize for that. It seems like we may have a little audio here for a minute. Luke, are you still there?
Knows where the location's going to be. Orientation I went over, definitely the specs. Sorry about that, lost a little bit of the connection. But the specs that are needed as well, you got the temp range and humidity range. Typically, for example, you got the customer he needs 75 degrees plus or minus 5 degrees all throughout the year, and he needs a 50% humidity plus or 10%. And also something that you might want to advise the customer on, the smaller that you can keep that range, the better. The larger the range, definitely the more expensive the unit gets. Also, a question to pose to them is chilled water available? So if chilled water is available, we need to know what the entering water temperature is, what the leaving water temperature is, and then the glycol type and percentage that is in that chilled water. And if they don't have it available, there is DX cooling. A benefit of it is the most common method for cooling applications, and also it is usually typically less expensive than a chiller. Now, if they of course already had the chilled water available, it will save on the capital equipment cost. So definitely would recommend DX cooling if chilled water is not available, but they do have it. It is a recommendation that they go ahead and use that. All right, so do we have any questions?
All right, before we get into questions here, Luke, just a couple things I wanted to mention before people started logging off. Don't forget your handout there on the toolbar, so download that before you leave the presentation. And also too is there's going to be a short little survey, 2 or 3 questions that you'll get 1 hour after this presentation. Please fill that out and let us know, 1, how we did, but 2 is if you have any topics and suggestions for future webinars, so we appreciate that. We do have a few questions that came in, Luke. First question is, what is a typical decibel level?
So a typical decibel level, if also, of course, it depends on, definitely it depends on the size of the unit, and then also where the air makeup unit is installed itself. But if we're talking just a typical installation and one of our standard units, it's going to be around 80 to 90 decibels.
Oh, thank you very much. Another question here is, let's see, it says, I have a customer with 3 booths and they don't have an AMU. Could a demand unit work for them? And then how would they be in the booth with the unit? How do you tie the booth together with the unit?
So what that is, so definitely a demand unit will work. And what it is, it's what's actually the term for it is, it's you can do a 5-speed contact. So as the name implies, you can actually 5 different speeds. But for this instant, you got 3 booths. So with this contact, we would actually add an extra contactor to the control panel of the booths, and that way they can communicate back to the air makeup unit, you know, the different CFMs of this booth. So that way, if they're only running one booth, you know, the air makeup unit will run at that CFM, or if they're running the other one, it'll run at the CFM. The thing to keep in mind though is whatever the air makeup unit is set up for, you know, let's say if it's 10,000 CFM, it can only go down 30% of the full CFM. So if you got 10,000 CFM going into your building, it'll only go down to 7,000 CFM. So that's just something to keep in mind.
All right, thank you. Another question we have are, what are the specific considerations for sizing the heating and cooling of an AMU unit?
So the heating and cooling of the air makeup unit. So when it comes to sizing, it depends on what your CFM is, and then of course what your range is going to be on the temperature and the temp and the specs on the temp, whether the cooling, you know, what your range is, whether they have humidity or temp. So yeah, and it's all really around the CFM. And the thing I talked about before was the recirculation. You know, definitely if you have the option, you know, you're only having to supply 20% of the CFM, it greatly reduces the size of that air makeup unit.
All right, thank you. Just another minute here. It doesn't look like we have, that looks like all the questions for now. So if you wouldn't mind, please going to the next slide. If anybody has a question, you can still type it in while we go through these last few slides here. The next slide you'll see, that is the who to call list for the Col-Met personnel. On the right, you'll notice it's a map broken apart by which rep has, which regional sales manager is responsible for which territory. And then on the left, of course, you'll see the phone numbers and the contact information for those representatives. Next slide, please, Luke. As I had mentioned, this presentation will be available on the Col-Met YouTube page. The recording will be posted there tomorrow. And as in all of our webinars have been posted there, it makes a really great reference tool or training, as if you get new individuals that have joined your company, you can always send them to the site and do a lot of training right at the Col-Met YouTube channel. On the left of the page is a picture of the Col-Met website. Luke had mentioned in his presentation that you can go to the, a lot of this information can be put into the request for quote. Simply, it's a series of questions that are answered, and then that goes directly to the inside sales team. So those are 2 great resource tools there. And Luke, one more slide, please. This is, again, just letting you know that we have our presentation on Thursday is scheduled for 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock as the sessions were today. And then our last slide here is we actually have another series of webinars that will now be available. Luke, if you could go to the next slide, please. This is the new series. There was a mailing that went out this morning. These next 4 webinars, we're trying something different. These will actually be available for both end users to attend as well as distributor personnel. So these are geared more toward helping your operation, maintaining it properly, and how to get some cost savings out of you know, some of the current processes or procedures you're doing now, how to save some money with those. So again, these sessions here are available. The mailing went out this morning. If you did not get that mailing, please send an email to marketing@colmetsb.com, and I will make sure you get a copy so you can sign up and register if you'd like to. And then, as I mentioned, this is our next set of presentations. And pretty much, one more question came in, Luke, if you're still there, appreciate it.
Yeah.
At what velocity should the supply ductwork be designed for?
Ooh, I want to say, I believe it's 2,200 feet per minute. I will definitely make sure to verify that. Definitely hate to make any assumptions, but I can definitely look that up and make sure to get that answer. But I'm pretty sure that's around the feet per minute that we design it around.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And there is no more questions, so we do thank you very much for attending today. Appreciate you joining our series of webinars, and like I mentioned, 4 more available if you'd like to join up for those as well. And we'll give it another minute here, and then that will conclude our webinar for today. Thank you very much for attending.